Hi, I'm Rick. Welcome to Elbow Shots. Today I want to take you into a maze of a hallway in a townhouse. Angled hallways can be challenging to install. I'm going to show you a few techniques I use to turn this into this. That's it. The secret is sparkles. Now back to reality. I'm working with a skip sawn or skip face, random length hickory engineered hardwood flooring. Skip sawn means that some of the pieces have circular saw scars and some have straight line bandsaw scars. It provides a rustic yet sophisticated appearance. This flooring is stapled down, but the techniques can be applied to any plank floor, like laminate or vinyl planks. You could even use some of them for tile floors. Most of this installation was pretty straightforward up to here, where things start to get interesting. First, I need to get some more paper down. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but this one piece of paper had some challenges that you may find interesting. I have this piece left, which is enough to cover this open area. What gets cut out is still big enough to cover the rest of the strip. I want to make sure I have enough to reach the wall. Then when I get it in place, I throw a little dead weight on it to keep it there. When cutting paper or sheets of plastic, to keep it from bunching up, I nick the end to make it easier to get it started. Then I make a relief cut at the corner. I hold the corner down with my foot and roll the piece around and let it flop into place. Once the bulk is removed, I can trim it more precisely so it will lay flat. Then I can cut the strip that I need off the balance and still have a usable piece. This angled fireplace might be a bit of a challenge to cut hardwood to, but the paper is fairly simple. The paper tears easily enough, but I prefer to cut it with a knife to keep it straight in the corner there. Whoever removed the carpet did a really good job of getting everything cleaned up, but sometimes a stray staple will refuse to leave with the others. I had to tear a piece back out, but if you do it right, the piece may still be salvageable. I'm prying it backwards to preserve the back edge and to keep it from ripping off the tongue of the previous row. When I get it out far enough, I can knock it away with the shunting tool. Then the piece will lift right out. I found the easiest way to remove staples or nails from a subfloor is with a pair of channel locks. Grip it and just roll it right out. Because I need to rip the tongue off along this wall anyway, I can reuse this piece. It can be tricky to space random length planks. I'll be installing a piece of T-molding between the kitchen and the hardwood, and I want to make sure I leave an expansion gap on the hardwood side. I lay out and mark the entire row. Then I take them all out to the saw and cut them all in one trip. With the second to the last row, my stapler won't fit in at the wall. To keep from switching guns back and forth, I wait until I get both rows in place. Then I can face nail both rows at the same time with the finish nailer. Whenever possible, I keep the nails under the trim, but not too close to the edge that it splits out. With a multicolored floor like this one, sometimes you have to get creative, so I'll mix the putty to get different colors. You can use 2 colors to make 4 colors. It's for a tiny little spot on the floor. They don't have to be a perfect match, just close. While you were looking at blobs of putty, I went ahead and did the fireplace. The angle was the same all across with a couple of notches, so it was fairly easy to cut in. Don't worry, the fun is about to begin. How do we keep the flooring straight when wrapping around a wall? First, I start with one of my longer boards. Make sure it is parallel with the previous rows. Measure how far it needs to move over, and also allow for your expansion gap from the wall. I can staple it down where it's in contact with the existing flooring, but I don't want to nail the tail yet. Over in this doorway, I'm going to temporarily nail down a scrap strip of flooring. I'll have to reattach the carpet here when I'm done with the hardwood. In the meantime, I want to cut the pad back to where it needs to be so the door will close. This is the master bedroom door, and I want her to be able to close it tonight if she wants. Transitions should be directly under the door, so that when the door is closed, they don't stick out on the other side. This one is wider than the door, so it will be even with the jamb on the carpet side, and then I'll notch around the stops to let it go as far as it needs on the hardwood side. So I usually cut the flooring to end about 1/4 inch into the doorway. That gives me enough to cover the edge when the end cap is installed. I use another long plank and butt it firmly against the installed flooring. Then I can pull the tail into parallel with that plank. I face nail the piece with a finish nailer, pull back my guide, then blind nail at the same location as the face nails. I'm working from the angled cuts on this end to the straight cuts on the other end. I cut another long board at my angle and use it as a guide to cut in this little triangle area. Then I can fit these in reverse order. Let's see if I can use up some of the scraps from the other room. This one is too short. This one is long enough. Now can I get enough width to do the rest in one piece? Yes, that will work. I can use this piece from the fireplace on the other side. The finished carpenter had already marked the center of the angle on this bull-nosed corner. I'm just going to extend it down to the floor for my measurements. I mark the distance from the end of the plank to that line, then mark the intersection at the width. Using a speed square, I mark my cuts. With that end done, I can mark the plank to length. Holding my guide plank in place, it should slide right in, but something's holding it out. I'll have to pull it out of there, give myself some room to work. Something is keeping the piece from fitting. It's pivoting on the corner. There's a blob of sheetrock mud that got covered with paper. I'll just cut it out with a knife. I can align the right ends of these two pieces and slide them in together. Remember, at this point, the guide plank stays stationary and I adjust and fit to it. This piece is long enough when I slide it into the right place. To keep the speed square perpendicular, I align the near edge with the line of my planks. Place the other corner under the point of the door jamb. Then I can measure along the edge of the plank to see where to make my mark. Transferring that to my piece, I put my mark on the tongue, not the face of the flooring. Measure to the jamb, making sure the cut edge will be underneath by about 1/4 inch. Now I have a point of reference to mark my cuts. The next measurement is to cut it to length. With this piece marked, I can make my cuts. The reason I haven't nailed any of these pieces in yet is that I can't get this one in with the others in the way. I'll pull them back to get this guy in his spot. And I pushed it back too far, so I'll pull it back out, put them together, lining them up on the right side, and push them in as one. I put my guide piece in place, and I can pry everything out a little to tighten it up. With my pieces in place, I can face nail the first piece under the base molding and under the transition. Then pull the pieces back out and blind nail it along the tongue. The second piece is still too close to the wall to get my stapler in, so I'll blind nail it too. I had my nailer too flat, and the tip of the nail bent and came up through the face of the flooring. I'll show you how I dealt with that in a second. First, I'll finish nailing the plank. Whenever I have a nail that isn't holding right, I will usually shoot a nail on either side of that cricket to keep it from chirping when someone steps on it. I have a couple of options. I could pull this piece out, use it as a pattern and cut a new one, or I could cut the nail off with my nippers and drive it down below the surface with a nail set. The cupped end of the nail set helps keep it on the tip of the nail. There isn't much room to swing at this angle. Turning the hammer sideways gives me a little more momentum. I can tap down the wood fibers to get a smooth surface and fill the hole with putty. With the third piece, I can go back to using the stapler. This is a good time to get some longer planks into the mix. When I get to the other side of the doorway, I have another challenging cut. This plank is just sitting on top of the tongue of the previous row right now. I mark the center point of the jamb on the plank. I have it tucked under the jamb about 1/4 of an inch. That way I can measure the distance I need to move from the end of the plank. And remember to allow for expansion. Here I'm using the speed square to transfer the mark and to mark the bird's mouth. I'm going to go ahead and use the rest of that paper from the kitchen cutout to fill in here. The next piece going into this corner is similar. Get it in place and use the speed square to determine where the corner is. Speed square is a handy little tool for a job like this. I only needed the mark on the very end of the plank. Ignore the other mismarks. And then I actually cut this one at the mismarked X instead of trying to clean that off. Now that we have that part done, we have another doorway over here. One row isn't enough to reach the transition. I'm going to install this row in 2 pieces to make it easier to get them under the jambs. Then I can put the last thinner row in using a single piece. After I get the angle cut on the first piece, I can mark out the doorway. Yeah, I cut this piece a little too long. It's too long to even bow it in. I usually cut a piece like this to the insides of the casings. Looks like I got it a little too long and we'll have to retrim it. The relief cuts in the backing made me nervous about bowing it too much. Now I can bow it a little to get it in place. If this jamb wasn't sitting up high, you wouldn't be able to see this mark. I'll show you a little trick to keep from having to worry about coming up short when making these corner cuts. When you're making your cuts, stop short of the corner at the face. The table saw blade will cut out the bottom, and then using a utility knife, score it across the corner. Then you can snap it down and you'll get a little more coverage where the casing and jamb come together. It made absolutely no difference in this case, but make a habit of it and that will save you a lot of time. And then I made the same type of cut on the other side of the doorway. Almost done here. Pop quiz. How do you figure the square footage of a triangle? Multiply the length of one leg by the length of the other, like a rectangle. 4 times 4 equals 16. Then cut it in half. 16 times half equals 8. 8 square feet. Easy. We have one more doorway here. First, make sure it's long enough. For this piece, I have already nailed down the rest of the row. The concepts are the same. I mark the point at the corner of the door jamb, then measure the distance from that point to the end of the previous board, and transfer the marks to the plank. It looks like that flat cut will be under the jamb, so we're good to go. Before I go any further, I want to get the temporary strip in this doorway. The transition will be directly under the door. We want the flooring to extend into the space enough to be covered by the transition and still allow for an expansion gap. So we allow 1/4 of an inch to the door side of the stop. The tip of this piece will extend under the jamb without additional cuts. So I flipped the plank around backwards, aligned the finish end with the strip, and marked the length at the previous plank, which is not nailed down yet. Now which way does the speed square go? Oh yeah, there it is. To get this one in place, I'll have to get the other one out of the way. The strip gives me a fixed line to work from. When I get over to this other side, I haven't nailed the previous row in because there's no path to get this goofy piece in place. I just put them there to measure for rough cuts. I'll have to take these out to get this piece into position. There's a little resistance on the bottom of the jamb, so I didn't get it pushed in far enough. Still not enough to get this piece in. I'm in contact with the sill plate, so I'll have to trim a little more out of the bird's mouth. I could probably have cut more off, but when I pull it into position, there will be an expansion gap at the sill plate. A light tap is enough to drop it in. This piece could have been placed before I tapped in the others. No problem, it slides in easily enough. And I'm going to have to face nail it anyway. All of these pieces need to be face nailed. I shoot finish nails wherever the flooring stapler won't fit. Out of ammo with only one more to shoot. Sometimes staples need a little more persuasion to seat themselves. Left alone, these crickets will most likely start chirping. I made a staple set out of a 1/2-inch cold chisel for 7/16 crown flooring staples. These are only 1/4-inch crowns. I ground the tip down flat, used a hacksaw to cut the groove, and cleaned it up with a triangular file. Or you can buy a staple set already made. In a pinch, you could use a nail set, but you have to set both legs independently. If you haven't seen it yet, you may want to click on this video. The laminate flooring techniques can apply to all types of plank flooring. Thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below if you have a question or just want to say hi.